Election night was not the only place that Donald Trump and MAGA lost this past week. They lost in 8 different court proceedings around the country, coast to coast, federal, with juries, with judges, with appellate courts, with magistrate judges. And I'm going to go over it right here and tie it together. Donald Trump and his administration are going down the drain. He is finally being chopped down to size by the hundreds of lawsuits that have been brought against him. And when I go over the permanent injunctions, preliminary injunctions, temporary restraining orders, orders about grand jury materials, acquittals, and even the Supreme Court oral argument this past week, it's all turning terribly, terribly against Donald Trump and in favor of our rule of law. Our rule of law, our system of justice, it's getting its groove back. And I'm going to talk about it here on the MeidasTouch Network. Let's take it in no particular order, but from coast to coast. Let's start in Rhode Island, where Judge McConnell, the chief judge, issued not one but 2 major orders this past week alone. In one, he entered a permanent injunction, which is what comes at the end of a trial, to stop the Trump administration and its Department of Justice from withholding billions of dollars of transportation infrastructure payments to blue states and blue cities who have sanctuary city and state policies where they're not going to cooperate with federal officers. They're not going to interfere with them, but they're not going to cooperate with them in helping them enable them to facilitate and effectuate the immigration laws of Donald Trump. And that's been blocked now permanently by Judge McConnell in Rhode Island, affecting the rest of the country. He also issued 2 temporary restraining orders requiring the Trump administration to pay out SNAP anti-hunger payments. And Trump, as of the time of this recording, has already had to pay out $5 out of $8 billion owed to 42 million people who are in hunger and in poverty in America, who are Americans. And that's now, so at least he was able to get 5 out of the 8 billion. Now the other 3 billion or so is up with the United States Supreme Court. I'll talk about that in a minute. Move to Massachusetts. This is all this week, by the way. Did I remind you? Judge Talwani also issues a order against the Trump administration about SNAP payments and making sure that these 42 million underprivileged Americans, including 16 million children and babies, don't starve to death. Now let's move down to the District of Columbia Federal Court, where Jeanine Pirro and the Department of Justice were unable to obtain a conviction of the sandwich guy. He's the former DOJ paralegal who threw a salami sandwich, sub-sandwich, wrapped, covered apparently with onions and mustard, at a Custom and Border Patrol officer. Jury did not find that that was an assault or an interference with a federal officer, and acquitted sandwich guy. So juries are not buying what the Department of Justice is selling at all. Let's go south to the Eastern District of Virginia. 2 major orders came out of there. Magistrate Judge Fitzpatrick ordered that the Trump administration turn over all, and he meant all, documents and information against James Comey or for James Comey in the criminal prosecution of the former FBI director. He also ordered that the grand jury material be turned over. Now he's going to have to revisit that particular issue, but he also excoriated the Department of Justice again this week, telling them that their habit of prosecuting first and investigating second is coming to an end. That's a case that's going to trial in the beginning of January. Another judge related to the Eastern District of Virginia in the Letitia James matter, Judge Curry, who sits in South Carolina, just to be confusing, she issued an order this week that required that all, and she meant all, the grand jury documents and information and transcripts about Lindsay Halligan get turned over to her to determine whether Lindsay Halligan was improperly appointed under a statute related to vacancies of U.S. attorneys. And if so, what should the remedy be? Should the indictment for Letitia James be dismissed? Yes or no? Of course, we say yes. Let's stay on the East Coast and go to Washington, D.C., where on Wednesday there was a major oral argument, a landmark one, some would say, about whether Donald Trump's tariffs are going to survive against 200 countries trying to raise trillions of dollars in revenue. Sounds a lot like a tax, doesn't it? A tax can only be done by Congress. And even the MAGA right-wing and Trump appointees were not pleased with Donald Trump's arguments about his trying to tariff and tax his way, stealing power from Congress. We didn't get the ruling on that yet, but it's not looking good for Donald Trump. And that was going up and down the East Coast. Let's move to the middle of the country in the Midwest and go this week to Chicago, where Judge Ellis issued a temporary restraining order against the Trump administration continuing to abuse First Amendment protesters in the city of Chicago. She's now entered a preliminary injunction, ratcheting it up from a TRO, finding that the clergy, First Amendment protesters, and the press have been abused by the Trump administration. She also found that the head of Operation Midway Blitz in Chicago lied under oath, which means the lawyers are in trouble too, because they suborned perjury. They allowed perjury to happen in the courtroom. When Greg Bavino, who headed the operation for the Trump forces, swore under oath that he was hit with a rock before he fired tear gas at protesters in violation of Judge Ellis's order. She found that was a lie, that he perjured himself, and she entered a preliminary injunction against further abuse of protesters in Chicago. Now let's move to Oregon, where just as I was recording, Judge Immergut, a Trump appointee, issued a permanent injunction against the Trump administration, blocking them permanently from deploying the National Guard on the streets of Portland, Oregon, and also finding, after a 3-day trial, meaning that's why it's a permanent injunction, it comes at the end of a trial, that Donald Trump violated the state sovereignty of Oregon and of the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. Now let's take the plane up just a little bit here. Tuesday, crushing, resounding defeat and wipeout for the Republican Party. Not just in, well, they won in New Jersey. They always win in New Jersey, the Democrats. No, a moderate in Mikey Sherrill won in New Jersey, and she flipped counties that had been red for Donald Trump in 2024. She flipped them back to being blue. In Mississippi, I repeat, I'm not stuttering, 2 new Democratic delegate seats were won, right? In a sea of red in Mississippi. 13 delegates in Virginia, now blue. Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court justices in Pennsylvania, all the ones, the 6 that are up that are blue, they won. New York elected a progressive Democratic socialist as mayor, but Virginia flipped from red to blue with its moderate Democrat Governor-elect Spanberger. You then had Gavin Newsom putting all of his political muscle and might and goodwill to get Prop 50 passed, and the voters in California voted 64% to redo the maps of California to add 5 new Democratic seats. Hispanics turned against Donald Trump on Tuesday night. Women turned against Donald Trump on Tuesday night, election night. The independents turned against him. And there was a lot of flipping already from red to blue. Terrible night. Now let's look in the courts, where we're both winning. Billions of dollars of funding is being returned to people in need in the United States. And we're tying Donald Trump and his Department of Justice, who are mentally exhausted and morally bankrupt, tying them up in knots. Look at this losing streak. If I, and I've been a lawyer for 35 years, if I was a law firm that represented a client and had to report to them that in 1 week we lost a permanent injunction and 2 temporary restraining orders in Rhode Island, another bad order related to the same thing in Massachusetts, a jury verdict in D.C., 2 orders about criminal prosecutions against us in the Eastern District of Virginia, a terrible day, probably a losing day about tariffs. I'm up to 8 so far. Tariffs in the United States Supreme Court that we can control with 6 justices, a temporary restraining order from a Chicago judge, preliminarily stopping the abuse of First Amendment protesters, and a permanent injunction, that's 10, a permanent injunction from a judge in Oregon against the deployment of the National Guard, we would be fired. The Department of Justice is not doing well because Donald Trump destroyed its integrity, destroyed its authenticity, destroyed its ethics. It has no credibility in the courtrooms. So that's why the Department of Justice will have an epic week, a historic losing streak of 10 cases. I think I said 9 at the top. It's really 10, or 9.5 for the Supreme Court, in 1 week, in front of juries, Supreme Courts, appellate courts, federal courts, from Rhode Island to California and Oregon, from sea to shining sea, from the Purple Mountains to the, I'm starting to break out into patriotic song here. And I know a lot of people I've seen in comments sometimes because they're getting fatigued, and they shouldn't be. I don't want them to be. I want them to focus on democracy and the rule of law and what we're doing in the courts with almost, 700-800 cases it'll end up being soon, and a 90% winning streak in those cases. What we're doing to both win, stop Donald Trump and he folds, get billions of dollars where it belongs, or tie Donald Trump up in knots and slow down his fascism, his dictatorial, tyrannical pace, and hold him accountable. That's what's happening. I'm glad you're here on the MeidasTouch Network and on Legal AF. Take a minute, come over to Legal AF YouTube, hit the free subscribe button. Come over to Legal AF Substack and think about becoming a paid member. That's what pays for the commentary and the honest observations. At $6.77 a month, you can become a full card-carrying member of Legal AF. So my next report, I'm Michael Popok. Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.